Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the PH Journals podcast. Firstly, I just want to kick it off. We are running a competition. If you guys haven't yet seen it, head along to my Instagram or Facebook page. Go and check out the Love 4x4 competition where you might just be a lucky winner just before the festive season to walk away with a set of 7-inch W spots. Now they are absolutely epic. Those of you guys that know me know I really enjoy gear. I enjoy the gadgets and all that sort of stuff. So to be able to kit my bucky out with a set of new spotlights that give me the flood and the distance is absolutely epic. And I've teamed up with Love 4x4 to bring you guys the opportunity to win yourselves a set. So although the season is over for majority of the professional hunters out there, you might just be one of the lucky winners that will walk away with a beautiful set of spotlights for next season. So without further ado, this week's episode is Beyond the Camo. We'll touch base on what that all means in a short while. So, another episode of the PH Journals podcast, and this week is all about Beyond the Camo. Now, for those of you that are listening to Beyond the Camo episode for the very first time, just a quick background of what this all entails. Well, a couple of years ago, I realized that I had slipped into an extremely deep hole of depression. And I've been a professional hunter now for some time, and one of the things that I worked on really hard was when I was in the bush, I utilized those opportunities to try and break myself out of it. I did go to rehab facilities or mental institutions where I learned a lot about what actual depression was all about, and I wanted to overcome it as best as I possibly could. I'm a father to two amazing kids, and I realized that being the best version of myself was going to be the only solution of getting out of this hole. So I really dived down deep into some of the struggles that every man or individual face throughout their career. It doesn't have to be just professional hunting, but I used hunting as a tool to help me break a lot of the demons that I were fighting inside of my head. And I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about the industry. I learned a lot about where we stood as an industry. And my overview and my viewpoint of the industry as a whole was that a lot of us men out there, especially now at the end of season, we find it very difficult to reconnect with everyday life. I might just be speaking for myself, but I do know a couple of individuals in the hunting industry that have reached out to me with their own mental battle. So I do know that there are a few men out there within the PHing, outfitting, and hunting circles that do struggle with mental health as it is. So I decided that because hunting's given me such a great platform and it's given me an opportunity to express who I am, part of the journey of my life has been mental. It's been diving down into my mental rehab facilities. It's been diving down into my mental state when I'm out in the bush. And it made me realize one incredible thing, and that is that hunting does so much more than just conservation. It's a personal well-being upliftment when you're out in the bush. So I launched the side of the podcasting, if you want to call it like a sub episode of the podcast called Beyond the Camo, and I've had a couple of incredible individuals on. I had Bruce Campbell. He's fighting a life-changing and life-threatening disease, but yet he's still doing Ironman and all that sort of stuff. So it was a massive inspiration in my life. We interviewed Dr. Bass, who's also a profession in the counseling avenue side of things. So he taught us a lot about how you handle your mental well-being when you're out in the bush. He's given us some beautiful, he's written a book and all this sort of stuff. And I learned a lot in that podcast about fatherhood and what it means to your child being a father in the hunting industry, and how important our time really is with our little ones. Because those of us that are in the hunting circles know that when we are professional hunting and the seasons are always chock-a-block, it's very important to try and balance your time as much as you possibly can, especially if you have got a family. So we learned a lot from that. But this episode was all about my personal journey and where I found myself currently at this point of view. But at the same sense, try and offer, like I said, I'm no expert by any means, but I've been very fortunate to deep dive into some of the personal struggles that I've had with myself. And although it might not resonate with the majority of individuals out there, for me, it's whether there's one or two individuals that might resonate with this specific episode and episodes to follow, because I would like to do this on a more regular basis, because my mental health has been a massive part of the journey, and it's been a massive part of who I am as an individual today. I'm extremely proud of that, and I want to take nothing away from it. It's been a special process. A lot of people look at it and say, depression, negative and all that. And what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to spread awareness about is breaking that stigma around depression and just making individuals realize that when we do go through these bad patches, you don't have to do it alone. And there's many people out there that might actually translate with what you are doing. So that's just a brief background story on Beyond the Camo. Sorry, don't camo yourself. But Beyond the Camo. It's just a segment of the podcast that I just thought would be incredibly valuable. And why not? We've got a platform of more than 3 million downloads. So why not put it out there to individuals? And if it gets used, it gets used. If it doesn't, it's okay too. So guys, this episode is, like I said, it's a very special one because I think it's a lot to do with myself and who I am and where I've come from. Because there's one thing I've realized, it's incredibly grounding to be able to walk or to be able to wake up and see the sunrise. Hear those hardy dogs, as annoying as they may be when you're hunting, or it's an incredible feeling to just have the cold air in your face and really just appreciate the moments you get to have when you're out in the bush. And I think that's one of the most incredible things that hunting does, is that it forces you to stop and appreciate those things. And I want to encourage as many individuals out there, professional hunters, clients coming out, to just stop and take everything in for a moment. I always talk about the hoopoo story with Sharon. It was a life-changing experience, and I'm probably will touch on it again. But a couple of weekends ago, I did a documentary. Well, we did an episode with Josh and Lyndon, and they are really special individuals. It was their first hunt they ever did. But I was so focused on moments with that hunt that I smelt a waterback for the very first, well, not for the very first time, but I smelt a waterback for a very, very, that I recognized, or I took the time to inhale. I'm trying to find the words. I'm struggling to find the words here. But for years in my career, you will smell a waterback and be like, waterback are close by, and then move on. And if you're not chasing waterback, you would move on and try and find telltale signs of the species you are tracking or tracing or walking after. But in that moment, there was no pressure. This was a very low-key hunt. It was their first hunt, so we wanted to get them nice animals, respectable old animals, and we were culling at the same time. But I walked up onto this rock, and it's hot. The heat is pelting down on us. We've had about several frustrating stalks. But we walked into this group of female waterback, and I smelled them, and I was like, that's a musky smell. Like it made me stop and recognize that smell, and that smell was so deep, intense, because I took the time to appreciate it. And I know this might sound ridiculous as I'm speaking, but there's a lot of different things out there that I've realized that if we just stop and really embrace that moment, whether it be a smell, a sight, something you hear, you really have it in such a concentrated space in your mind that it holds a very special memory. And I love that. I love being able to go back and relive that moment. And I've always said when you are struggling with mental health and you are going through a bad patch, it's important to hold on to the moments, and it doesn't have to be massive moments in your life, just very, very small moments. You often hear motivational speakers and stuff and say you always got to win the battles, right? But winning the battles is appreciating very small moments in life. So, for instance, one of the examples these guys always use is making your bed in the morning. It's a small victory that you've got to stop and appreciate. It's something so insignificant in the greater scheme of life. But when you really slow yourself down and you make your bed and, it's all nice and smooth and you've puffed up your pillows and you've put them on your bed and you take a step back and you look back at your bed and you appreciate what you've just done, it's a very powerful moment in the greater scheme of things. Because if you take a lot of those small moments and you continuously do it throughout the week, and you continuously add to it throughout the week, throughout the month, throughout the couple of days, it becomes more and more powerful, more and more prevalent in your mind, and you appreciate those things so much more. So that's what I'm talking about. So when I was there, I took the whiff of this the water back, and it was a moment I appreciated. And then the next step down, we moved up into a mother and a daughter, or two female giraffes, one mature giraffe and one calf. And it wasn't anything to do with them, but it was just the scene of how the mother was facing right and the baby was facing left, and they both looked at us at a 90-degree angle with their heads. And just that scene was so beautiful that you'd be able to take it in. Now, why am I mentioning this? I think the real reason behind why this is so important in the greater scheme of things is because what hunting teaches us to do is to be present as much as you possibly can. Often in times, and I always use this analogy with a lot of my social media staff that I've got now and all that, is we often picture ourselves at the end of the race before we've even started, when what we should be doing is picturing ourselves, stretching before, going down to kneel into position for the start line, getting ourselves into position, waiting for the gun to go. There's a whole sequence of events that's got to happen before we get to the finish line. But often in life, what we like to do is like to see the end result and not appreciate the moments throughout. And that was my message I tried to convey when we were out there in the bush, was that, yes, it's frustrating. We've had 7 stalks that have been increasingly frustrating. Every stalk, it just gets more and more frustrating because you get that little bit closer. But it's a sequence of events that lead up to those opportunities that we forget to appreciate. And because I'm in this state of mind, because I'm very present within my own mind, I've realized very, very quickly that, yes, you're going to get frustrated. It's fine. It's part of it. If you're not getting frustrated out in the bush, I think you're doing it wrong. But in the same sense, appreciate the dung beetle that you've just stepped over. The locusts giving it to one another. It's those small moments in life that we realize that the more we focus on that and the more we appreciate that, everything else that falls into place is that much more sweeter. And the result at the end of the day is not always the greatest thing, but it's how we got there. So, yeah, guys, that's definitely one thing I wanted to leave everyone with, the sense that hunting's taught me to slow my life down to such an extent that a lot of people get frustrated with me because of the small things that we have to appreciate. Now, I'm not saying this is going to work for everyone, but for me it certainly works. And I've really managed to pick myself up out of a lot of difficult situations with just those basic principles. So it's important. It's important. What we are doing, not only for the great of or the good of conservation, but for the good of our mental health and our personal growth is so intense. Another thing I wanted to mention was, and I've done a podcast on this about patience, but in the greater scheme of life, I think what hunting does is, because in a world that's changing literally by the day or by the second, let's call it by the second, because I'm slowly realizing that, there's a whole lot of different things, and I'm sure I'll get into many different episodes on Beyond the Camo about the benefits of certain hormones like dopamine and all these sort of things. But for now, to keep it as simple as possible, we fry our dopamine hormone before 8 o'clock in the morning. Life is just that hectic right now. We're always on WhatsApp, we're always on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all these different platforms, consuming large amounts of content. And when we deplete our dopamine that early in the day, we've got to keep fueling, or we've got to keep finding the next hit so that we can always stay on the high. It's pretty much like any sort of addiction, like smoking or drinking or whatever it may be. But one thing I've started doing, especially when I'm out hunting, is because right in that moment, whether you hunting for yourself or you taking a client out, you forced into a position where that is your focus. Whatever happens on TikTok, whatever happens on Instagram or WhatsApp or whatever it may be, doesn't really matter in the greater scheme of things. It's about what you've planned to do, to set out to do, and how are you going to execute it. So you don't need to check your phone. And I've made a rule when I go out hunting, is that yes, I charge my phone next to me every single day. I use it as an alarm clock. And when I wake up, the first thing I go and do is make myself a cup of coffee, and I go and I stand outside. Not for any specific reason when it comes to mental health. It's just I want to try and deter myself away from the temptation of picking up my phone and scrolling on Instagram or scrolling on TikTok or whatever it is. Because I've realized that is insignificant in that moment. And when I hunt, I feel so much better that by lunchtime, it's okay to go onto Instagram and flip through it and stuff, because you haven't fried your dopamine throughout the early periods of the morning. So a good life lesson in any sort of scenario is that, and I've started doing it on weekends as well, is that I would wake up and try and leave my phone as far away from me as possible. Or, I'll unlock it, I'll check the time, I'll switch off my alarm. But I'll only ever touch my phone closer to mid-morning, because I've realized that anything that happens between when I wake up and before the first task I do is insignificant until I've realized that, okay, I've completed X amount of tasks today. It's okay to flip through social media once in a while, because I haven't fried those dopamine reactors. So it gets a little bit more complicated, more scientific than that, but This is all about basic principles when you're out hunting, and why hunting is such a good tool to utilize in your everyday life. Because when I am out hunting, I take a lot of time to appreciate that is the moment I need to be in, and whatever else happens electronically doesn't really matter. And there's two things that happen there. Number one, you show massive amounts of respect to that animal that you are hunting, because you are significantly putting in there more effort. And number two, it's really, really important to understand that moment, that time is yours, and no one can take it away from you. Unless there's a massive emergency at home with your family. Other than that, nothing else matters. So we have to have that recognition in our minds to say, this is what I'm setting out to do. This is why I want to do it. And this is how I feel about doing it. And it's a very powerful thing. So for me, hunting is so beneficial to be able to reconnect with yourself deeply, mentally, and spiritually. But we'll get into that as we go along on this journey of Beyond the Camo. So, on this episode, I didn't really want to touch on it, but there's a young individual that I've had many conversations with. He's a young professional hunter. He's been in the hunting industry for some time. His dad's been in there for years and years and years. And his dad's an extremely passionate individual, not necessarily about hunting, but just about life. And he believes showing vulnerability is a sense of showing weakness. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because another intense moment we need to understand that is part of hunting, and what is it all about, and something that I've learned that makes very struggling to find the words, but it makes a personal accomplishment that much sweeter. And it's vulnerability, empathy, sympathy, however you want to look at it. I know there's a bit of a controversial thing between empathy and sympathy. I've said it many times that I feel a good hunter is one that shows empathy towards the process of hunting. Hunting is not something that I feel anyone gets the joy out of killing. I speak for myself, and I'm sure a few people out there. So please don't. I might generalize quite a bit, but I think for the majority of individuals that do this, for the reason of conservation and primal instincts and reconnecting with themselves and nature, there's something extremely powerful in showing a lot of vulnerability when you're out there. And I don't mean to go and cry over every kill that you've had. I mean, it does get emotional sometimes, but to really open yourself up to how special that moment right there and then really is. And the hunting industry as a whole has been molded around extremely strong personalitied individuals. Now, this is where the misconception might come in, is because I'm incredibly grateful for a lot of the older generations that I have learned from. I'm extremely grateful for that, because I feel that their personality strengths and hardness and all of that has come from trauma, or has come from this built up intensity of life. And their way of dealing with it is not to show any sort of vulnerability or any sort of weakness, because we men. So a lot of individuals out there like to seek strength in, bombastic's a bad word, but like to seek strength in overpowering one another, dominance. And although, because we are a species, we are a primal species, although that is probably one way of looking at it, I feel in today's age we've had a massive disconnect of why that is so powerful. And it might just share right now that the generations, or the millennials, or Generation Z or X, or whatever the fucking things are, sorry, I don't know too much about that stuff, but might just show why we are a little bit, not less manly. Yes, that's terrible. I'm really struggling with stringing the words together tonight. But why that may be seen as a less alpha male type vibe is because that we are more connected with our softer emotions right now than anything else. And that, for me, that personally is a very good thing, because we are aware of the more subtle emotions that we hold within our body. Now, when dealing with such hard individuals within the hunting industry, and you come along and want to show vulnerability, there's intense power behind it if the correct message comes across. So we need to be on the same page. And if an individual that's got a hard outtake or a hard personal persona about him, and you've got an individual that's a little bit more vulnerable, if they are wanting the same thing, there's a powerful thing that happens. There's this connection that that kind of gets connected telepathically, and there's this immense and intense respect built up between the two individuals. I've seen this many, many times. I've been very, very fortunate to be a part of it many, many times. And the most common example of this is father and son. It's a very incredible thing to see a powerful, dominating alpha male like father, and he's got his son. Now, as I'm saying this, I can imagine what people are picturing, like this timid. That's not what I mean. That's not what I mean at all. I just mean that this vulnerable side of his son that shows a lot of emotion towards things that have happened. And yes, might get emotional about certain things, or he's a little bit subtle to what has happened out there in the fault, or appreciative. One of the most vulnerable things to do as an individual is to show appreciation and apologize. So I've always said those two things. If you've got an individual that shows appreciation often and apologizes when he's wrong, you know that you've got an individual that's comfortable with being vulnerable. So that's a great example. So when this individual is appreciative of the moments that he shared, very, very interesting and a very cool story. I watched the Matthews episode with the white-tailed deer, father and son. Son must have been about 10 years old. And I want to tell you this brief story, but guys, please try and watch that episode. It's a beautiful not a documentary, but it's a beautiful hunting episode of a father and son. I watched it when I was cycling yesterday, and it made me stop halfway through my exercise, and I was just so captivated about these moments that these individuals shared. So this youngster, they're in the tree stand. It's obviously he shot a number of deer, but he's after this specific buck. And this buck comes into the tree stand. It's late evening. It's evening, it's dusk, the sunset. and he gets into position. He actually draws back, and the back just doesn't stop. Like, it just walks and nibbles and plays in the trees, and then carries on walking on. And this kid's just waiting for the perfect opportunity, because his dad's told him, this back is going to stand broadside. Wait for the moment, and then you just squeeze the trigger. I can just only imagine that that's what's running through his head. So his dad comes from a very dominating alpha male type thing, and he has this latte, and the back never stops. So he releases his bow down, and you can see, so the father's got the camera behind him, and this latte is like, so you just see his back, and all the latte does is hangs his bow up next to his tree and pulls his cap over his head, and he sits down, and you can see the tears, like, he just starts wiping the snot from his nose, and he's just like absolutely gutted with himself that he missed the opportunity. So now that is an intense moment of vulnerability, because there's so much raw emotion going through that he doesn't want to let his father down, because that specific father would never shout at his kids, but he doesn't want to let his father down. He doesn't want to be seen as weak. That's why he hides his hat, and he sits. He doesn't want to show that he's crying or anything like that. And he also doesn't want to show that he's been beaten. He doesn't want to show that the opportunity missed is because he's being beaten, like he's missed that opportunity. So it's a very, very powerful scene. Anyway, his dad gets onto it, and he drills this beautiful buck a couple of days later, and he starts crying. But you can see it's an overwhelming cry, because he's stoked for his old man, but he's still got that sense of, I've let him down. My opportunity's gone, and I've let my father down. So very, very powerful moments, 2 moments there. But then, as the suspense draws, a little bit later in the episode, they get back, and this back comes in after a couple of opportunities, and this back starts coming in, and it's the one he wanted. It's a 3-pointer. It's beautiful whitetail. Gets into position, and you can see this kid draws back, lets the arrow fly, and the overwhelming amount of relief that kid showed in that moment was that he still very calmly, he shot the perfect shot, still very calmly hung the bow and put his hands up to his face, and he just couldn't contain his excitement, turned to his father, and he just wanted to exploit his emotions. And he saw the deer go down and everything. It was just such a beautiful moment. So that's what I mean about captivating those vulnerable moments and really enjoying them as much as you possibly can. Because one day when you're a father, to show that hard and alpha male dominance exterior might not be the best way to deal with a lot of things that are going on in individuals' lives, especially when you're dealing with kids and young adult males. Is that you need to teach them that it's okay to express emotion when you're out there, because it's a very symbolic thing that you are doing. You're reconnecting with yourself, and you deep diving into parts of your mind and your soul and your body that not a lot of people get the opportunity to do so. And it's a very powerful thing. It really is. So to put this masculinity exterior on for the good of not showing vulnerable moments, you might just be what's the right word? You might just be doing more injustice to yourself and to the true feeling of that experience. So, yeah, guys, there's a lot to dissect in this episode. What I would like to do is, as we go on with this series of podcasts, is deep dive more into like individual things like dopamine and how we can utilize it out in the hunting field and all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of like serotonin build up and all that we can really deep dive. I would love to get more individuals about how powerful the mind can be, but I've been incredibly blessed for the past 5 or 6 years of my life. And I say that with respect because I know how difficult it is to get out of depression. But to be able to sit here today after 2 failed suicide attempts, beating depression, I don't take a single antidepressant as we speak because of the testimony of all the hard work that I've been able to put myself through, is something very, very special. And to be able to share this knowledge with my podcast audience it's daunting. I'm not going to lie. I feel very, I guess, vulnerable because it allows free judgment to what's actually happened. And a lot of people might look at this segment of the podcast. They might support me on the PH Journal side, but the Beyond the Camo, they might just think, oh, what a load of bullshit. There's, toughen the fuck up, just get over your emotions. But I get that. I understand that. I know there's individuals out there like that, which is okay. I mean, it's cool. Doesn't mean you guys are or doesn't mean you're a bad person or anything like that. It's just, I really hope my intention for this is just to share a bit of knowledge and hopefully help a couple of individuals out there. So yeah, it's one of those things where you never know how it's going to hit, but you never know until you try, right? So that's just how it is. But yeah, so Beyond the podcast, Beyond the Camo is back, baby, and it's back with a vengeance. This was a really cool episode. I really enjoyed doing it. And yeah, I guess it's that time of the night where I ask you guys, please, if you enjoyed this episode, turn on the notifications. And yeah, if you enjoyed, like I said, if you enjoyed it, turn on the notifications and drop a thumbs up. And please subscribe, guys. Like I said, it's cool to see now that the more I've mentioned this, the more the views start balancing out with the subscribers. Now we're getting up again. So if you are listening to this on any platform, please just subscribe. It really helps. Yeah, and who knows? I think that's about it for this week's episode of the podcast. Like always, if you are, happy hunting. Until then, stay safe, stay blessed, stay humble. We'll catch up with you guys soon.